You don't want to sort of think about, I've currently won 4 or 5 tournaments and constantly be thinking about that during the next season. You've got to forget that. That's something that you can look back on when your career's over. You need to forget about those things because you need to keep building, because there's a lot of players who haven't had that success that are trying to take your success away from you.
Welcome back to another episode of my podcast, Relentless Life on Your Terms. I have a very, very special guest that I've known for almost 30 years. I've had some amazing sporting icons on this show, from footy players to world champion fighters to boxers, kickboxers, you name it. But this guy comes on top of all the echelon when it comes to Australian sport. He's a 23-time ranking event winner, won over 30 events, former world number one. He's won a world title in the under-21s and the professional world title in 2010. I am, of course, referring to my friend Neil Robertson. Neil, welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much, mate.
It's been a long time I've tried to get you on the show, but you haven't been in Australia now for quite some time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, usually when the professional season ends, I come back home for a few weeks, and I think the last time I was here was actually pre-COVID, and so since then, the couple of years, sort of when COVID happened, it was really tough to get back to Australia because they weren't really allowing you to travel back out of Australia, so I had to wait a couple of years at the least anyway. But then our daughter, Miller, and I had a daughter, and so we thought we would wait sort of, a couple of years before she could kind of come out and really enjoy the Australian experience. And here we are. This is actually the first time I've managed to come home for Christmas for 13 or 14 years. Usually we spend that in Norway, but I thought this year would be a great opportunity with Penelope being 4, Alexander 13, that I'm enjoying like an Australian Christmas. It's been amazing. Been here for a few weeks and it's kind of gone by very quick, but we've had a great time, and important for me during my season as well to have a kind of complete reset. I feel really good now, sort of going into the second half of the season.
Oh, look, your list of accolades is so long. A lot of people don't know snooker in Australia. It's not as big as it should be in the sport, but just some of the achievements that we mentioned, to win 23 ranking events in 6 of the major events. You've won a world title. You've won 3 UK titles, which is another one of our majors, and also 2 Masters. I was actually fortunate. I saw you. I flew over in 2015. You never won the title, but you came second that year and you beat one of the best players, I think, in the semis. We were talking about it just on the way, Ronnie O'Sullivan 6-1. So you've had such a great career. And most people don't know the sport, but you are one of our Australian icons overseas that a lot of people should get to know. And I'm very, very proud to announce, because your list of what you've achieved is second to none when it comes to Australian sporting successes.
Yeah, it's certainly a career I've been very proud of, and something that I'm sure when we first met that we probably wouldn't have thought I'd be able to achieve. And
that's not true. I actually used to say that. I have to butt in there because I remember, and I have to share 2-3 stories. Before you won one event, I remember we travelled, because me and Neil represented Victoria many times in under-18s, under-21s, I think it was 5 times. You never won one event at that stage, an open event in Australia. And I said to you, Neil, what's your goal this year? And he said to me, I want to win every event in Australia. And I go, that's a bit out there. You never won one at this time. And your belief to keep improving, and I said this to my brother Zen, because I've known you for almost 30 years. I never met anyone that could hit one stumbling block, you get to the quarterfinals, you would have amazing self-belief, then you get to the semis, then you get to the final, then you'd win it. You always had that much insane belief in yourself that even if you cut down here, I knew next year you're going to do better and better. And I remember walking with a couple of the juniors and I said, this kid will be world number one, he'll win multiple world titles, and he'll win X ranking events. And all my predictions have come true in terms of world number one, world champion. I always saw that in you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really too sure where it came from. I think that our dad was always very positive, always sort of trying to inspire us through whether it be movies or sort of like motivational kind of tapes and things. Or I remember just driving with Dad in the car, and he'd always be playing like these motivational tapes in the car, and like the little cassette you put in the car, and it's stuff that sort of still sticks with me now, and I think just having the certain sort of sporting stories, and you're listening to previous greats. I remember one of them was like a famous clay pigeon shooter in America, and he had a real negative father who would always tell him, "Oh, you sure maybe you can't do this or can't do this." And he was always someone who was very positive. Always believe in yourself no matter what, even if it's the closest people to you. And he was, and this guy was very good at sort of deleting the negativity from the brain during competition. He'd be. I remember the line where he's pulling he's about to pull getting ready for the clay or whatever it is that shoots out, and there'd be a little voice in his head saying, "Oh, you sure? You sure?" And you'd constantly just like, "Shut up!" Bang, boom. And I think listening to that when you're like 12 or 13, if you start to buy into it, then you can become very good at that. And
It instills it in your brain.
yeah, and so whenever there's been maybe a little negative thought into my brain or anything, I've always thought back to that moment being with my dad in the car where the guy is about to pull the trigger of the clay pigeon shooting. I think of it and I just think of that. I just think, just go on, you're out,
Switch.
get out.
I remember that in juniors, like had an amazing ability to long pot, and it was your belief in yourself. I mean, technically, you were very gifted. Your technique's amazing. The way you cue the ball, even some of the greats say you got probably the best cue action ever. But it was that belief on crunch time that you were always going to prevail. Even when you weren't winning events, you still believe you would. So it was only a matter of time. And I saw that time and time again in all the juniors that you won, I think it was 4 or 5 under 18 Australian titles. I remember you
Yeah, it's
won that
four in a
cup.
row,
It
four
was
in a
four
row.
in a
And
row.
I wasn't allowed to play in the last year because I was too good.
Yeah, but then you won a few of the under 21s, and we always had some funny stories. I remember I was always one of the older ones. I think I'm a couple 2 years older than you, 3 years.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
41 now.
79. So yeah, I was
Yeah,
three
three
years old. I
years.
remember. I remember one funny year was me and Ian Barber's a bit older. We had to look after the younger ones, so they foolishly let me and Ian look after everyone. A couple of you guys drank too much, and we had to carry you to the room. Not you, but it was another one of the players. We're thinking, oh no, me and Ian carrying. But we always had a good time. I don't think you won that event. I think Ian won that one.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I lost in the semi-finals
Semis.
to Ben Middleton. It was, yeah, Ian won.
I remember though. I remember a funny story. You're always cool as a cucumber, even under the most extreme pressures. That event, I remember we at another snooker hall. We were playing with, I think it was Matthew Bolt from WA. We're running late to. You were playing a match, and I was stressing out for
Mark
you.
Mark Worry.
It was against Mark Worry from WA. You were running through the shopping center. You almost landed on your face, slipped like that.
Yeah,
You
because it was
kept the
really wet. It
cue.
was raining
It was
outside. Yeah,
raining.
and I'm wearing like dress shoes, right? And you're trying to
Yeah.
run through a shopping
And
center.
I'm stressing for you. You came into the match 3-0 down because you were late and you won 4-3.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have cut things pretty fine with a lot of like sort of in terms of my preparation for matches, and that is great. But um, I do like but I'm like this generally in life. I do like cutting things sort of fine with time. It's quite exciting. So I think it's subconsciously it's quite exciting where it's not so much maybe for the other person waiting. And my dad actually thinks it's part of my brain that does it to get myself even more up for a match, create that excitement because I'm very laid back. Um,
Sure.
he has some crazy theories from time to time, and it's a pretty interesting one. Obviously, you're much better off sort of like preparing and getting to a place much earlier than later. But for whatever reason, there have been a few times where I've cut things quite close. But I've never been late for like a professional match or anything like that. But yeah, there were certainly some funny moments. That was one of them for sure. I mean, I thought for sure I was going to be throwing the cue up in the air and landing on my backside, but somehow I I managed to stay
It's
up
like a
and
mirror. I saw you from the
ended up
back. I'm
winning it.
laughing as
Yeah, I
well
remember the laugh still. I remember you laughing
because
as we
I
were
got to
coming
know. I
in.
can't believe you stayed up. And I remember the Masters in 215. We went to Desiree's to eat some food. We got caught in ridiculous traffic. I was so stressed because we were about to go to the Masters. You made it again, of course, on time, and you played one of the best matches I've ever seen. You played Ali Carter and you beat him 6-1,
Yeah,
6-0 or 6-1, 6
six. Yeah,
6
6-1, 6-2.
6-1, and I remember him looking up every time you were snookering. You played close to the most perfect match in my opinion. Then you played the semis, and Ronnie never lost in a semi prior to that, and you beat him also 6-1.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it was yeah, it was an amazing event, and like I was really happy that you could actually come over and see that because coming from Australia, to an event, I think the Masters is probably the best one, as the world title, I think, as well. But the Masters with that London crowd and sort of 2,500 there is pretty awesome. And I was really happy for you on a personal note that you got to see me play Ronnie. That would have been an absolute sort of dream of ours, sort of like growing up. And again, I sort of go back to that, and who would have thought that would have happened? But
I did.
yeah, but yeah, no, it was great. Like that match in particular against Ali Carter, a lot of people said that's probably the greatest all round performance I've seen. Like the safety was really good, the long potting was great, and the scoring was
You
fantastic as
didn't
well.
give anything to him. Like you could, I've seen you score century after century. You've scored 10 centuries against me in a day. But that match, even every time you were playing safe, he couldn't see a ball. It wasn't even that it was the safety was that good. And I've never seen a professional look up so many times and shake his head and think, I don't know what's going on here. But it was a very proud moment coming all the way from Australia. It was 2015
Yeah,
to see one of my closest mates in snooker go that far. But to win 6 events, and there's still more, 6 major events and 23 ranking, I think that was over 20 I said you'll do. And I knew you could. And there's still a lot more in the tank because you're still playing great snooker. You're still close to you're in the top 8 of the world. You've been number 1 many, many times. What are some of the key highlights? I mean, I've mentioned a few of them. What are some of your key highlights in your career, whether that be amateur, whether that be professional? What would be some of the things that you
um,
really remember?
I think yeah, a lot of great memories from the junior days, of course, like with us and that, and I think forming like the friendships that last for so long. I think that one of the big turning points for me in my career was winning the World Under 21s in New Zealand in
Yes.
2003.
2003. I
Yeah,
remember.
that was a really, really big turning point because I remember having a couple of goes at going over to the UK to be pro and stuff, and not really sort of working out. Um, Combination of maybe not setting myself up in the right sort of place to practice. Couple of places I did go didn't live up to what I was kind of hoping for. And so, you come back to Australia a bit disheartened. And I remember sort of not really having any kind of like degree from school or anything like that to kind of like fall back on. And I remember sort of being I was in the queue for Centrelink. I think in
I
Ringwood
remember this
where I lived,
story.
I was in the queue, and I had no way of earning a living. It was during like the Australian kind of amateur snooker circuits like downtime where we didn't have anything on for like 4 months or so. So there's no way of sort of getting by there. And I remember being in the queue and just sort of like thinking like, is this going to be my life now? Sort of having to struggle through this, and there was someone like ahead of me in the queue, and I think back then you had to prove that you had been to like 10 job interviews or something in order to get paid. And this guy didn't meet the requirement, and he started like kicking off, and he had to be sort of like almost thrown out of the place. And I remember just turning back from the queue and just leaving and just like going home and thinking what to do. And then shortly after that, I remember getting a call from Mike Peachy saying that I should really go to the World Under 21s in New Zealand. Sorry, the Australian Under 21s, because I was Victorian Under 21 snooker champion, and I was that disheartened with the game that I wasn't even sure if I was going to go to the Australian Under 21s. And he said that you should really, really go, and he helped with getting the funds to make sure I could fly to Queensland, get the hotel paid for, all that sort of stuff. And
What a turning point.
yeah, and I remember going there. I won the tournament. I always knew I was going to win the tournament, but I was just that down with the sport. I didn't really want to play. And I made the record high break in the under 21s,
142?
142. Yeah, that's
I
right,
remember.
142. Yeah. So I won the Australian under 21s, which meant that I then had all expenses paid to the World Under 21s in New Zealand, and but there was still no avenue for me to get back to turn pro because there wasn't any kind of Australia qualifier, Oceania qualifier like there was. So the only way was to move back to England and qualify living in the UK.
And for those who don't know, you've got to move so all your family's here. It's not like it's a sponsorship, like it's a golf, tennis, Formula One. You're going off your own bat. Your family's all here. It's very hard to find sponsorship. Why would someone sponsor an Australian player when they've got a local player that's been playing it for so many years? It's so hard for an Aussie to make it. That's why in all the history of our sport, you can really mention maybe a handful of players that have done a tenth of what you've done professionally snooker wise. It's been so difficult for our players to go over there.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember the last trip I had in the UK. I won a few Australian tournaments. I'd like saved up like $10,000 back in, so it would have been like 2001 or something to move to the UK for like sort of 5 or 6 months, and I went through all that money and then come back sort of absolutely broke. And so that was what was required at the minimum, that you had to save up about $10,000 of your own money or get someone to sponsor you. And like you say, there's not really anything in it for the sponsor. It's more of like a donation, really. And so the World Under 21s was coming, but there was still no guarantee until a guy who was running the academy in Wellingborough, where Peter Ebdon, James Watana, and Ding Junhui, young Ding Junhui, was there. That he said that he had convinced World Snooker to grant 5 overseas wildcards for the best performing players from outside of the UK to get a tour spot. And he said that Steve Misford, who won the World Under 21s in Egypt in 2002, Steve went over to Wellingborough to get a few months sort of practice and stuff, getting ready for the main tour, because Steve qualified by winning the World Amateurs, and I was with him in Egypt when he won. And Keith Warren said that Steve's been talking about you a lot and saying you're playing really well, because this is after I beat Steve 8-1 in the final of the Australian Open. And so Keith said that I'll be considered for one of the 5 wildcards if I performed well in the World Under 21s. And so all of a sudden, in the space of like a couple of weeks, I had this opportunity and what I considered to be my last real opportunity to give it a sort of like a really good crack at making it as a professional. And so Keith flew over because he had a few players he was representing in the Under 21s, and I started off really well. It was pretty evident I was one of the favourites, along with Ding Junhui. There's a lot of great players in that field as well.
You beat in the semi-finals with Ding Junhui, I believe, and then you beat
Lu Song in the final.
Lu Song in the final.
So Lu
11-5,
Song got
11-6.
to about 30 odd in the world. Ding has been world number 1. Mark Allen was in the other semi-final. There's Pankaj Javani, who I beat in the quarters. Multiple, I don't know, he's won about 15 world billiards titles or something.
Won like 20.
So the overall standard in that field was considered the strongest ever. And the fact I was able to kind of get that wild card off my performances in the World Under 21s, was huge. And who would have thought sort of in that particular tournament that I guess there's been sort of over 50 ranking event wins between myself, Mark Allen, and Ding Junhui. Something pretty close anyway, at least 40 anyway.
But actually, yeah, of course. But you look at it back then. That was your third time as a professional, because you had a couple.
Mm-hmm.
You also had to. I remember you beat Robbie Folvari at Q Sports.
Yeah, that was when I was
in the Oceania.
Yep.
To get your first spot, and the New Zealand title was your third spot, wasn't it? That
was my second time. Yeah.
Second. I remember another story when someone said, "What do you do?" Before you actually made any money, you said you're a professional snooker player. Which that belief, I forget who mentioned that story to me.
May have been Stuart Duncan, I think.
Because you asked, might have been at the Oceanas. I remember that. Played in that event. Stuart played great. He had back-to-back centuries against me, beat me quite convincingly. But he asked, "What do you do?" And you said you're a pro snooker player. At that point, you never made much money from the game. You definitely weren't professional. Right. But in your sight, you had that belief you could do it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and again, that goes back to my dad, because even when I'd come back, having not done very well, and when I was only sort of 16 and 18, and back then, sort of moving to the other side of the world was a lot harder than what it is now. There was no kind of internet or WhatsApp, FaceTime. There was nothing really to have that sort of that constant connection with your family, other than finding a payphone somewhere with like an overseas sort of card or something. It was shocking. So there was never that there, which made it really difficult. And so when I used to come back, my dad would always be really positive. He'd always just focus on improving. The results will come. Don't worry about you have to be as good as this player or that player by this age. Just keep focusing on trying to be one of the best in the world for your age group, and then
everything will follow. But you got to remember, you started playing Q Sports considerably older than these kids, because they're unbelievable at such a young age. So you were starting already from behind, and you're from Australia. It's not as competitive here, so they had a lot of disadvantages. But your pure self-belief got you to the summit of the sport on multiple occasions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think there was a lot made of the juniors in England as well. We would hear stories of them doing things that, they had never come close to actually achieving, because I've got to know these guys really well. I said, I remember talking to Matthew Stevens. I said, like, someone came back from Australia completely disheartened, having a practice session with Matthew Stevens when he was like 14 or 15. And I remember asking Matthew, did that ever happen? And he was like, no, I never did anything like that.
What
It was something like, I mean,
made
you'd constantly
X
hear
centuries?
stories about, there's 14-year-olds making 8 centuries in a row in England. And so I'd be like, I'd be 14 or 15 at the time, can't do anything like that. And I'd be thinking, well, I'm nowhere near good enough.
So that
But
didn't
these guys
happen.
never done anything like that. No.
Sounds good
What
though.
it would be, it'd almost be like an excuse from them to show that, for the reasons why they didn't do so well.
That's it. That's insane. But I do a couple of sessions we were talking about before the camera. I remember we were playing at Brunswick because we played a couple of times in the same team, and I remember I think it was on table 2. I played really well. I made one or 2 centuries and 1 or 2 80. So I made 3 frame winning breaks, and you beat me 18-3. You made 18 breaks over 60. And I remember Steve Missett, who's another guy you mentioned, good friend, was walked in, and I was so, back then I had a bit of a temper. I don't think I have one anymore. And I was just so angry. I go, everywhere I put in bloody pots of ball, I can't play any better. And you beat me 18-3.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was when I was really, really progressing a lot as a player. I remember practicing a lot with Scotty Matthews and Brett Rogers as well when,
At Ringwood, Q
in Ringwood, also Q Sports as
Sports,
well
yeah.
in Knox. But where I really sort of started to go through the gears was a club in Dandenong. It was called Pot Black back then. I think it's called Potters now. And I remember just every day, that was when I started, like, I was just in love with practicing and just wanted to get so good at the game. And it wouldn't be sort of, it wouldn't be crazy for some of the days that I've done, like sort of maybe played for like 10 or 12 hours even. I remember making 9 centuries in a day, and I was desperate to get 10 centuries in a day, and I just kept playing and playing and playing. And I think I made like 5 or 6 90s before I made like the 10th century. And it wasn't until like maybe like 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and then I was like, oh, I've done it. Now I can stop playing. So I was just absolutely obsessed with the game then, and just wanted to improve. So I think I was about sort of like 17, 18, around that kind of age when I was really doing that. And the notice of improvement when you start playing that much is insane. I think, and when you're that young as well, your ability to improve is so high.
What advice would you give to young players now that want to go out there and turn pro?
I'd say the most important thing is don't compare yourself to others who are in a different position to you. So players who are playing on professional conditions on a daily basis, don't always just compare yourself to that. You don't have to be world champion. You don't have to be top 10 in the world, or, just focus on yourself. Improve on the things that you have control over. That's the most important thing. So the amount of time that you have in a day, everyone gets given the same amount of time in a day to work on, to practice, to work on things. So I'd say that, if you go to bed knowing that you've done the right amount of practice, then you can't sort of
do more than that.
Yeah, you can't really do any more than that. Like, say, even if you have a part-time job, if all you can do is practice like 1 hour in a day, then just focus on that 1 hour. That's the only thing that you have control over. It's just like making like Arnold Schwarzenegger said it as well. I think that, he would, I think he said, he would always go by 6 hours sleep to go to bed at 12, wake up at 6 in the morning. And some people would complain saying they need 8 hours. And then he says, well, just focus on sleeping less. Like, don't worry about, that time. So set realistic goals. People often ask me, what are the goals you set? Like, some people are really big goal setters, like you have to achieve world number 1 by this, or world champion by this, or win this amount of matches.
Anything, it applies in business. Yeah. What about it?
So the thing I've always focused on is that I think that when you're playing an individual sport, I think it's important to have the dreams, but the goal should always be something that you can control. So sometimes a goal for me would be how many hours I practice in a week. And then when I achieve that, I feel great. Set small achievable targets, and you keep giving yourself little wins, and you feel really, really good. And so when I go into a tournament, if I've set a certain amount of time that I should practice and I go into the tournament, I feel great knowing that I've done everything I can do. The worst feeling is if you go into a tournament and you haven't practiced as much as what you should, then you don't feel as though you kind of really earned to get the good results. So it should always be about controlling the practice that you can do, I think, whether it be even going to the gym, doing exercise, eating right, these are the things that we can control. And so that's what, for me, has always been the focus.
The controllables. Because I remember you always used to practice all your long shots, your dead straight pull. I remember you did, I think, 19, 20 in a row at my house. Just jawed one, and you thought, look back, what can I do better? But no, you always had that ability to just. Your long putting was absolutely freakish. I remember even back in the day when Quinton was a pro, he used to talk about your long putting and say it's some of the best he's ever seen. I think he did got to the top 8, I believe. And when he was up in the game, he said Neil's long putting is as good as anyone's I've ever seen. And now you've got the likes of Ronnie O'Sullivan and people saying your cue action and techniques is as sound as anyone they've ever seen. Surely that's got to make you feel good when you hear people like that say that. When you hear your peers say that.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, especially from Ronnie. Ronnie is, yeah, I don't know. I get along with Ronnie really well. Some people kind of maybe don't sort of see him from an angle that I kind of see him. I understand him. He's someone who's struggled a lot with like mental health issues and stuff like that, and so I kind of like have a lot of sympathy from that point of view. So I don't really like judge him as much, and I think I've stuck up for him a lot as well in the media, and so then I don't know. That's kind of like formed like a good relationship with us. But sometimes he randomly sort of like will call me up and just talking about my game and stuff, and and kind of helping me, which is really strange because
He's
we've beaten each other.
you.
Yeah, I know we've beaten each other a lot over the years. I've beaten him. I think like 3 or 4 of the last sort of like 5 times we played in big finals, and so I kind of like when he does it, I think like would Federer call up Nadal randomly back in the day, when they were going at it, but but he's always someone who spoke really well of me. He always has. He says that he's really envious of my cue action and stuff, and the timing, the way I hit the ball. That semi-final, I think that when I beat him 6-1, he had a little chat to me saying, "Oh, the way you hit the ball is unbelievable." Like, so it's a great compliment to have because it took many years to sort of perfect that, and I think coming from the Australian conditions where you have to hit the ball so much harder as well, maybe that's built in that natural kind of cue power that I have with the ease to move the wide around and to stay still on the shot.
Because it's a lot harder on our conditions. Their conditions are a lot different. So I remember there was a professional event here for quite a few years in Bendigo, and I remember which we were sitting here at the Reventine Snooker Academy in Yarraville, and there's this table at the front there which I bought for you to practice when you come over. So it's the same conditions, which is a star table, and that's a lot quicker. The pockets are a lot tighter, and that's what you usually play on when you're overseas.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that's one thing which is like a massive advantage as well, is that over in the UK, or well, especially in China now, where there's so many players coming through, that they have these like professional tables to play on. So when they when they go over to the UK or when they go into professional events, that adjustment period isn't so severe as what I experienced. I remember, and also the cloths as well. Like the cloth is completely different when you play with side spin. It throws off probably an inch more than what we're used to, or throws even the other
Over
way.
there?
Yeah, it throws it even the other way. So if you're playing a shot with, I'll try and make it sound as simple as possible. So if you're playing a shot over here with right hand side spin with a, maybe you're playing about a centimeter or so with right hand side spin. The ball over in Australia, the ball will tend to sort of throw out to the right as from your side pretty quickly. Whereas over in the UK, playing on the professional cloths that are also heated underneath, the tables are all heated, the right-hand side spin will push the ball left. So it's a completely different adjustment. And that's why when I first went over there, I was playing these shots with side spin and the ball was doing the opposite of what I was expecting it to do. So you have to kind of almost learn the game all over again. And, it took many years. So that's one of my goals, and one of the things I hope for is that we can, start to set up, maybe have an academy or two, something like that in Australia, where sort of the best young talent can go and to, adjust to the conditions before they go to like, the World Under 21s or World Amateur Championships and stuff like that.
Give a better chances. I know me and you have spoke about if one day when you do retire, you come back, we look at opening like an academy here for young players to go through with similar conditions, because it will increase the chances of the next Neil Robertson coming through for Australia, because it took a long time to get you. So it's hopefully we can get a few more going over there representing Australia.